Welcome to another segment of the New Hampshire Dental Society webinar series, where it is my honor to interview and work with various groups and components to share valuable resources with its members. I am Troy Zerveskes, a business partner of the New Hampshire Dental Society and the principal of my firm Advisory Resource Group, where I've been assisting the needs of dentists and medical professionals as both a financial advisor and a practice consultant for over 15 years.
Okay. All right, everyone, we are going to go ahead and get started with tonight's webinar. Thank you all so much for attending. So tonight we have Troy Zerveskes. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that.
Yeah, that's great.
So Troy and his firm, the Advisory Resource Group, have been assisting the needs of dentists at all stages of their careers for more than 15 years. He is both a financial advisor and a practice consultant, acting as a problem solver and facilitator for the challenges that accompany every stage of a dentist's personal and practice life. He assists his clients with purchasing and expanding practices, attracting and retaining team members, partnership and associate planning, debt management strategies, and a myriad of other advisory, investment, insurance, and retirement services. So tonight, as we go along, if you have any questions, you can feel free to just raise your hand over on the side here on your control panel. And at the, we're going to have a few breaks throughout the night, and if I see that your hand is raised, I'll go ahead and call on you for questions. Or as we go to, you can kind of enter things into the chat box here, and I'll be consistently watching that so that we can get those questions addressed as well. So with no further ado, here is Troy.
Awesome. Thanks, Ava. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. It's 7:30 at night, and we're talking about finances. Yes, what could be better? So I'm going to start with a cheesy dental joke because it is 7:30 at night, and I just can't resist. So this is my favorite dental joke, which is a patient comes into the office and says, "Doctor, my tooth hurts." And so the dentist goes ahead and says, "You know what? We're going to have to pull the tooth." And so they do. And then soon after comes the bill for $200, and the patient says, "But doctor, it only took you 20 seconds. And the doctor said, "I can take it, make as long as you'd like." Ba-dum-ching. Ha! Hey, Ava's smiling, so hopefully the rest of you are too. All right. Not too bad, right? Could be worse? Okay. So, as Ava said, I've been working with dentists and physicians for 15 years. This is what I do all day, every day. All stages, really, from people who are just graduating, even in graduation, talking to the different dental schools and medical schools down in Boston and other parts of the country, all the way to people who are in retirement and transitioning their practices and all of those fun things. What I've tried to create my practice to be is a one-stop shop for dentists, so it's really helping them understand the personal side of things, but also helping them to again, make sure that their practice is running as efficiently as possible. I believe that dentists and their practices, there's a gray area between the two, and where one stops and the other begins is oftentimes really hard to know. So by having a very good understanding of both sides, I believe there's a lot more value that can be added for the dentist. This season, we recently inked a deal with the New Hampshire Dental Society to be a formal business partner, so that just joins me that much closer with you folks, as well as other groups, so hopefully I can add that much more value. I'm also going to offer in the end a no cost or obligation meeting. This is something that I do for all the New Hampshire Dental Society members. It's just a time that if you have questions or would like to talk about some of these things in more detail, you know, it's kind of hard. A lot of the things we're going to talk tonight about are very broad, and so if you'd like to talk about them a bit more specific to your situation, I'm always here to help and work very closely with Mike to be able to create those opportunities for you. So as I started to say a minute ago, you know, I know that the new dentist group is a very broad spectrum of dentists. We have those that might be having just got started this spring, and we have others that may have already bought a practice and maybe be a year or two into that. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is really just about getting started. It's about helping you prioritize and looking at 30,000 feet from the top down at the different things that we should be looking at. I'm not going to get into real specific Roth IRA contribution limits and 401k and all those types of things. I'm really just going to help you talk or help you prioritize and look at the big picture to say, how do I begin to chunk away at some of these things that I know are important, that I've probably heard about before at some level, but don't really know exactly how to wade into the water. Or maybe I find myself having these conversations over and over and not necessarily sure how to answer some of these questions. So one of those, finding the balance between debt repayment and savings. That's sort of the age-old question of anyone that I've ever worked with who's coming out of a medical or coming into a medical or dental career. Building strong habits now to last a lifetime. A lot of financial planning and financial literacy is about flexing muscles that we maybe haven't used before and building those habits that will really last us a lifetime. And what I say to my clients is, oftentimes whether they're making $50,000 or $500,000 or $1 million a year, a lot of these things that we're going to talk about are constant and really hold true at all the different levels. So if we can quote unquote practice when things are smaller or easier, even all the way back in dental school, then that's going to help us make that much better decisions down the road when the numbers are a little bit larger. Understanding the importance of planning, the taking a step back and looking at the big picture before we make more specific decisions is an incredibly important thought process that we need to learn how to build for ourselves, especially when in a dental career there's so many different moving parts in terms of student debt and buying a practice and buying a house and family and all the different things that go in. It's very difficult to do any one of those things in a vacuum. Then protecting your income, kind of looking at yourself as a business. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then avoiding what I like to call the doctor traps. So tonight will be organized in 4 parts. Financial Literacy 101, Debt and Credit Management, Risk Management, and then kind of a quick crash course in practice purchase. And I'd like that last section to be as interactive as possible. And I think we could also take any one of these segments and probably turn it into a 2-hour session. So also understand that we're just going to kind of go through and again hit the basics, but please do either message Ava or raise your hand so that she can call on you. What I'm going to try to do is answer questions at the end of each section, just because we do want to try to get through this in about an hour tonight, and trying to do that. If we're answering questions as we go, I'm afraid that we might not get to some of the material. So, Ava, let's stop kind of at each section and we'll take time to answer those questions.
I do just have a quick question.
Yeah,
have you shared your presentation? Because when I'm looking at my screen, all I see are you and I. Although that view is great, but I don't know if we should.
Oh my goodness, gosh. Yeah. Sorry, so thank you, Ava. Hold on. Perfect. 1 minute here. Hopefully that'll be the worst of our technical glitches for the night.
Awesome, thanks.
So here's what everybody missed. So here's talking about where I've come from. Here's talking about getting us started and the other things that we're going to focus on tonight. The 4-part program, Financial Literacy 101. Here we go. Okay, so where do we start? When we begin the financial planning process, when people come to me and say, okay, Troy, how do I take that first step? So prioritization is incredibly important, and really where we want to start is the same way that we build a house, we want to build a financial house. And what that is kind of all of the quote-unquote boring stuff on the bottom. It's an emergency fund, which is basically just cash in the bank. It's our legal documents if we have a practice and a family and so forth. It's our insurances, disability insurance and malpractice insurance and health insurance. It's all those things that are going to catch us if we slip. That's really the first place to begin. So for many people, they're not going to go any further, maybe even for the first 6 months or a year of their career, of really just establishing those basic quote-unquote boring things, and that's okay. The next stage is getting into more of the fun stuff. So this is when we start saving for retirement and putting money into 401ks and IRAs and mutual funds, things of that nature. things that are going to help us reach our goals in the longer term. And then at the very top are the things that are most aggressive in nature. So this could be individual stock, or investing in a friend's business, or potentially starting our own business. But things that could potentially give us that much more return, but we have to take that much more risk in order to receive that. The thought process here is that if we don't build that strong foundation and something happens, we're going to feed from the top, or take from the top to try to feed the bottom. And if whatever it is bad enough, the whole thing falls over. So although sometimes we really want to be focusing on the things that seem more fun, like investing and so forth, if we don't have a nice thick cash reserve established, then it really is in a lot of ways for naught, because we're just going to have to take from those monies anyhow if something should happen that is unforeseen. Take this a step further in preparation for purchasing a practice, and it becomes even more important, because there's certain reserves that are required in most cases in order to purchase into a practice or purchase a practice. So, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go as well. Everything looks okay, Ava? We can still see the screen? All right. So let's next talk about something that you've probably heard about before, but it's really important that we talk about again, which is budgeting. And really more than budgeting is cash flow management. And I know budgeting has a lot of negative connotations to it. People saying, you know what, I've tried it before, you know, something always comes up, there's always something that happens, and so it's really not worth doing. What I care about budgeting is really just that we have a sense of what comes in, what goes out, and then what the difference is. That's really what's most important to me. And the reason that that's so important is I want people to understand what control they have over each of those different elements. And then I want them to understand how the difference impacts where they want to go in the future. So, because it is that difference that drives their progress. That's what's going to help them pay off their debt sooner. That's what's going to help them put money away for retirement. That's what's going to help them educate their children. So to the extent that people can understand what impact they have on their ability to do that, it really helps them change in their decision-making process. And again, like I said earlier, if I meet with somebody who's making $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year, we're starting at the budget and trying to get a sense of cash flow. It's really the same in either instance. So I'm going to run through kind of how I look at budgeting and how I think people should kind of approach budgeting in part of the larger picture. So the first thing is to identify your goals, and really what I suggest is write them down. Take out a piece of paper, open a Word document, and then just start to itemize what's important to you. You know, when do I want to buy into a practice? When do I see myself having our first child? When would I like to buy a house? All of the things that are important to you, just put them all out there. There's no right or wrong answer. You just want to kind of have things listed out at some level. Next is to estimate income. Now, for many of you, you already have an income. If you were, just jumping into a new career or you were getting out of dental school, you might need to estimate that. For most of you already know what your income is. So literally, you just kind of want to write that on the side of the page. I get paid X every 2 weeks. The net amount that I see is X, and just write that down. Understand your liabilities and expenses. Know who you owe what to. That becomes very important as well as part of this process. And again, just write all of those down. And we're going to talk more about that later. And then also understanding that earnings minus expenses equals your discretionary income. So what's left over is really yours to make decisions with, and the importance of that. And then number 5, trial budgeting is probably the most important part of the budgeting process. And that's a method where we might go through multiple iterations to get to the result that we think makes the most sense for our plan. We'll talk more about that, and I'm actually going to give a specific example of that. And then lastly, to review how your decisions impact the result, and continue again to go back through the trial budgeting process in order to come up with the result that makes the most sense for you. So Ava, is my speed okay? Is this?
Yeah, everything's great. Sorry, my audio cut out there for a minute, so I lost you for a little bit. But
No
I think
problem. I want to stay at a good pace because we have so much information to cover tonight, but if you feel like I'm going too fast, just slow me down, okay?
Nope, it's perfect.
So when we start this process, just using a spreadsheet, I have a template in my office that I generally hand out to people, and it's really, again, just trying to get everything on there, your fixed expenses, your variable expenses, just getting everything onto a spreadsheet. So let's go through an example of successful budgeting. So this is our example here. Let's call him Chris. Work for you? All right. I'm going to call him Chris. So this is our friend Chris. So Chris, they have $200,000 of household income. So it could be part spousal income as well, but there's $200,000 of income coming into the household. And let's say that's represented by about $10,000 a month after benefit expenses, could be retirement contributions, taxes, etc. So Chris has a debt payment of $2,500. He has a mortgage of $2,800. He has the basics, utilities, groceries of $1,500, entertainment, car payment, basic insurances. Chris has about $600 of discretionary income left. How did he do? Well, depends how you look. He's not negative, right? So from that perspective, you can say he's doing pretty well. But this is the process of trial budgeting. What if Chris went back through his budget again and just made some slight changes? He changed around how he pays off his debt, so maybe rather than making accelerated payments over a 10-year period, maybe now he's going to look at making them over a 15-year period. Mortgage might be a little bit different. Before it was $2,800, now it's $2,500, so now he made a slightly different decision on the size home that he purchased. He shaved down his utilities a little bit by kind of being mindful about where he was spending his money and such. Entertainment a little bit, bought a slightly smaller car before it was $600. Basic insurances, same thing, shaved down a little bit. And now he's got $2,250 a month. So the impact here is that by Chris going through and looking at each of the different line items and then looking at the end result, rather than having $600 to try to meet his goals, now he has $2,250. Well, that $2,250 gives Chris a lot of flexibility now in terms of saving for his emergency fund, trying to put money towards his debt to get it paid down quicker, retirement planning, or any number of things. So again, the idea here is to take that step back and go through those different iterations, if you will, of your debt until you get to that result that you want. So anytime before you're making a big decision in life, you want to go ahead and do this. So if you're going to buy a house, you want to look at, well, what is my budget going to be after I buy my house, and how much am I going to have left over after I do that? And then same thing, I'm going to buy a house and a car. But what if I bought a different house, or I'm renting now? What if I had a roommate? All the different ways that you could potentially look at your situation, but play that game before you actually play it. And again, I'm going to use the example again, 50,000 or 500. I'm having these exact same conversations with people who, are making $500,000 or more dollars a year. It's just understanding what's coming in, what's going out, and what's left over, and how we're using that to drive the difference. So next, it's wonderful. You've taken a Saturday, you've put all this together, and you've now got a perfect budget. But a budget is only as good as the mechanism that you create to track it. The budget is only as good as the mechanism that you create to track it. And so what that means is it's great to set it up, but if you're not then going to take the time to look at it, then we're probably doing it not all for naught, but there's a chance that we're not going to make as much progress as we could have otherwise. And how many of you have created a budget before but then never looked at it? Right, maybe 6 months later, yeah. And Ava, you're probably 90% of the people are doing the exact same thing right now, and I'm guilty of it as well, right? But the idea is that if we don't set up some type of mechanism, it's very reasonable to think that we're not going to potentially be as successful as we could be if we did. So there's multiple ways that we can do this, and I don't really care which, to be honest. All I want is for people to be in tune with whatever's going on. So the first way is software. There's Microsoft Money and Quicken and so forth, which are great and they can work really well. The problem is the output is only going to be as good as the input. And my experience is that most people don't really do the input. But again, if you can and you're willing to do it, that's awesome. Next is a pen and a paper. I've met with engineers before who have literally come out with a big ledger book, and had every penny that they've ever spent ever accounted for in that ledger book. Again, awesome. If you're going to do it, that's great. The reality is most people, I don't think, are generally going to take the time to do that. But if you will, that's awesome. And then lastly, there's the internet. We've got some really cool features now, really cool programs that were never available that now are, and there's more and more of them coming out. The most popular is mint.com. I imagine most everyone has heard of that, but if anybody hasn't, Mint's a program that you can link up your credit cards, your debit cards, and every time you use them, they'll automatically track them along a budget that you've set up. So here's the biggest error that I see with Mint. You want to use your spreadsheet first that we talked about a minute ago, then apply, after you've done your trial budgeting, then apply that to the mint.com budget. Don't try to create your budget on Mint. That's really hard. Do your budgeting and your trial budgeting first and then put that on Mint. But the goal there is that at the end of the day, you're basically just going to go to work, and in theory, Mint is going to keep track of everything and show you where you are. So you can check in with yourself maybe once a month, once every couple weeks, maybe even once a quarter. I think you should do it more regularly than that. But the data should be there and show you where you're at. And then over time, you're going to start compiling a lot of really useful data in terms that you can use of to say, hey, am I exceeding my budget? Am I hitting it? And is everything working the way that I think it should be? So, again, that's budgeting. I know we spent a long time on that. Some of you, your eyes might be glazing over a little bit, but I did it on purpose because that really is, it's the heartbeat, it's the vital signs of a financial plan at all levels. Okay, so now you've got your budget, and you know exactly how much is left over at the end of the month, and so now you want to start making progress with that. So to me, this is the only way that busy professionals make progress. The reality is you are all incredibly busy people. You're working long hours. When you're not working, you're going to CE courses, you're doing other things that are oftentimes more important to you than staying at home and managing your finances. So we have to find a system that's going to work in spite of you and in spite of your busy schedule. And this is really the way that we do it. Has anybody ever heard the term pay yourself first? A parent or a teacher or anybody ever talked to you about this? This is an incredibly important philosophy, and I really hope people will kind of embrace this as sort of fact and again try to build those habits. So paying yourself first, and this is my graphical depiction of paying yourself first. So on the left side is the dollar sign, so that's your paycheck. In the middle there's a net, and I'm going to talk about that. That's a net that you're going to capture dollars to fund into different places that you choose to go. And then whatever you let get through the net is yours. You're the big golden head over on the right side. And then you're going to funnel those monies down into different buckets that you deem to be most important for whatever stage you might be at. So let's talk about a short-term bucket. That's a savings account, a checking account. It's money that if you put it there, you know it's going to be there, it's not going to go down, but it's also not really doing anything for you. It's not earning any interest or anything that's going to really help you in the long run, but it is there if you need it. The stark opposite of that is long-term. Those are your retirement accounts, putting money into 401ks and IRAs and things of that nature. And now in those buckets, you're getting lots of nice tax advantages, but you can't really touch it. You're kind of locking those monies away and sort of throwing away the key until you're 59 and a half. And then in the middle is midterm, and this is the monies that I don't want to lock up for retirement, but I really don't want to just have sitting around in cash anymore, because do I really need to have so much money in cash? And then the last bucket is debt reduction, which is making payments over and above the minimums in order to try to pay off those debts faster than your lenders say that you have to. So here's the thought process. Let's think electronic banking for a minute. You can determine how much is left, right? And then you can say, I want $500 a month to go into my short-term bucket, I want $500 a month to go in my long-term bucket, and I want $500 a month to go towards one of my loans in order to try to pay that down faster. Then, let's say you've built up your emergency fund, you could say, you know what, I want it all to go to long-term. Or you know what, now I'm ready to start doing some wealth building and I want it to go to midterm. The idea is that at the end of the year, you're going to look back and that monies will have been funded into each of those buckets, whichever ones you deem to be most important at any given stage, and then you didn't have to be a part of that. It happened in spite of you, but you made progress. And if you do that over 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, a career, you will have saved and really made a ton of progress without really having to be an active participant. The alternative is that when you're paying your bills, you're saying, gosh, I've got, okay, $500 left over. I'll put it credit card. I'll put it savings. We don't want to do that. We want to take that step back and understand what progress we're making before we ever make those contributions. Here's another byproduct. When you do this, whatever you let get through the net, and again, I use that term purposefully, let get through the net, is yours to do whatever you want with. Waste it, spend it, blow it, go to Foxwoods. I don't really care, because you've made the responsible decisions first that are going to help get you to where you want to go, and you've given yourself an amount that you can play with, and so don't feel guilty about it. Take a trip. Have fun. There's nothing worse than working hard and then feeling guilty about a vacation that you took or a purchase that you made. That completely, to me, goes against why you've worked so hard to be in the careers that you're in. And so it's really important that you enjoy some of what you're working for, but it just has to be done in the context of an overall plan. And again, that goes right back to the budgeting piece. So pay yourself first. I know it seems pretty simple again, but incredibly important, and this will serve you for the rest of your life. Ava, any questions or anything that are worth talking about here? Did that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So someone has a question, so I'm going to attempt to unmute them so they can ask their question.
Sure.
Okay, I think you should be good.
Hey guys.
Hey, how are you?
My name's Nate. I had a question. My wife and I are investing through Acorns and Betterment currently, on top of trying to save through our TD Bank money market account. And I've been really pushing us to try to get us more into the Acorns and Betterment type savings relative to the interest that we're receiving off that money market account through TD, and I don't know how you feel about those types of investing relative, because you've been speaking a lot about long-term investing versus just traditional savings accounts, and I think there's like a middle ground there with those investment apps.
Yeah, and I'd look at those, great question, thank you. I'd look at those as sort of midterm savings, right? That kind of falls in that category of, you know, I don't want to lock it up for retirement, but I don't really want to just have money in cash. I'd like to have something that's going to earn a little bit better of a return for me. So I think rather than speaking specifically to Betterment or Acorn, I think I would look at it more philosophically in terms of your financial plan. And so, you know, the first thing to me is we've got to have our emergency fund in place. So that's number one. A typical emergency fund is going to be 3 to 6 months expenses. So if it takes you $8,000 a month to run your household, then I want you to have between $30,000 and $60,000 just sitting in cash. Whoa, are you serious? You know, but it's not going to earn any interest. It's just going to sit in a money market account. And the answer is yeah, because if all of a sudden the market goes down 20% tomorrow, but you have an unforeseen event or something that comes up, and you know you need money, you need that to be in cash waiting for you. It really shouldn't be in investments. So you need to have that emergency fund first. So that's number one. Number two is anything that you're going to need money for in the next 3 to 4 years really shouldn't have anything to do with the market either. So if we're thinking there might be practice purchase money, if we're thinking there might be down payment money for a new home, then all of those things would be emergency fund plus. So 30 to 60,000 an emergency fund, and then on top of that would be our home down payment fund, and then potential practice fund and so forth. So what that means in a lot of situations is that you might have a lot of cash on hand, a lot more than might seem sensible, but the reason for that is that it could instantly change overnight, and it does. And what happens, I see people having a ton of cash in anticipation, but then all of a sudden they buy the house, they buy the practice, they have a child, the child care starts coming in at $2,000 a month, and all of a sudden all that cash they have goes zoop, almost overnight. So again, investing is important, but I would say we need to prioritize it in the context of the overall plan. So if you have your emergency fund, check. If you have your expenses that you're gonna need to come up with cash for in the next few years, check. That's when you would really start taking that next step into more of that kind of, call it betterment or whoever you choose to use, wealth creation type of bucket. So again, everybody has a very different situation and personal, so it's hard to, again, paint with a broad brush, but those are the things that I would be looking at first when I'd be meeting with somebody to say, hey, do you have these basics in place first before we've gone on to that next stage?
Good to know. Does that answer your question? Are you good?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Okay.
So just to kind of, again, summarize some of the different account types in each of those different time horizon buckets. So short term is really just super safe money that we can get to whenever we need to. We don't care about the interest. We care about the safety and it being there when we need it. Midterm, again, mutual funds, stocks, the betterments, the acorns, things of that nature. Long term, again, retirement plans, and then the debt reduction, making extra payments. So real quickly, you know, when you do start investing, there's a few questions, you know, really to me 4 that I think people need to ask. And if they can answer 4 of these questions, or rather get good answers to these 4 questions, then it's likely they're probably going to make a good or at least informed decision about what they're doing. So number 1, what's your tolerance for risk? You know, and by risk I mean the level of fluctuation that you could expect a potential investment to have. What's your time horizon? When might you need this money back? I said earlier that, you know, again, we really don't want money touching the market unless we have a 4, 5+ year type time horizon. And again, those circumstances, it could even be longer depending on what we're trying to achieve. Could be shorter. But again, what's our time horizon that we might need those monies again? What are the expenses? How much are we paying for it? You know, high expenses doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means we need to understand what the value is that we're receiving for what it is that we're paying. And then lastly is, how is it taxed? If I put my money into this and I want to get it out, what does that mean? What's the impact to me from a tax perspective? So again, I think this is as far as I want to go with investing tonight. But if you were to make an investment in something, make sure that you ask and get the answers to these 4 questions, and that you can answer them very well, and that you make sure that you know what you just did. A real quick one, because this comes up fairly often, is, you know, should I be working with a professional? The bottom line is I believe people have to have 3 things. They have to have the time, the know-how, and the interest. So that little subsection there in the middle, to me, is generally the number of people that are able to have all 3 of those things. My clients are brilliant. You know, I think it's the one thing about having pretty much all doctors for clients, is that, you know, my clients are very smart. But the reality is most of them have very little time. So they might have the know-how, or they could have the know-how if they have the time. They might have the interest, but they don't have the time. Again, I think people have to have all 3 of these. The other thing that I'll say is that for the same reason that surgeons don't operate on their children is the same reason why people have financial advisors. It's very difficult for people to think about their money. People feel about their money. You know, when I look at somebody's student loans and their portfolio of $400,000, I can say, let's do this, let's refinance this, and I don't have an emotional connection to it. It doesn't really bother me because I'm going to go home, I'm going to see my kids, and life will be good that night, right? But when my clients are looking at their debt, they're saying, 400 grand, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? And so, you know, it's the same thing of you guys, right? If somebody comes on the table and their tooth is in half and, you know, they're a disaster, they're thinking about, oh my gosh, am I ever going to smile again? And you're thinking in your head, I've seen this 100 times before. I'm going to straighten that out. This person's going to be fine, right? It's that same type of dissonance between the situation. So again, I probably beat that horse a little bit, but that's I think why people have advisors, is for perspective. I've seen you before. It's not a big deal. I've dealt with this 100 times. So lastly, why is financial literacy important? So this is a multiple choice, a really difficult multiple choice question. So everybody put their thinking caps on. What's the biggest trap that new dentists fall into? Overbuying a house or a car, making decisions that could impact a practice purchase in the future, buying everything you denied yourself during training, or all of the above. Anyone? Ava, you want to take this one?
I'm going to go with all of the above.
All of the above. That is correct. That's why financial literacy is important. Again, you know, I think my clients, they can do most of the things that they want to do. They just have to do them in the context of a plan. And unfortunately, for better or worse, planning is just getting that much more complicated because people are coming out of school with more debt and all the fun things that, that go into being a dentist in the 21st century. All right, that was the end of section 1. Ava, do we have any questions that we want to address?
No, I think we addressed the one person that had their hand up before, so I think we're good there. I had one, and it's kind of, maybe you addressed it when my audio was all kind of freaking out there, but is there like a sweet spot of discretionary income that we should be looking for, like after, when you say like pay yourself first, when you get through all of that stuff, is there like a sweet spot for discretionary income that you should be looking to have left over for spending? Or like how much is too little, how much is too much?
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe the best way to answer it is to look at it from the other side, which is, what are some of the goals we should have? Typically they say we need 10 to 15% for long-term savings in order to meet retirement goals and such, and then 5%, if we start looking at insurances and education and so forth. So insurances are generally 3 to 5% oftentimes in a situation. So in a perfect world, if somebody could be saving 20, 25% of their income, that's a perfect world situation. Oftentimes people aren't able to do that, especially if they're buying into practices and they have debt service and so forth. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I think that's generally how we would look at that. The other way to answer the question is whatever it takes to meet your goals, right? I have some clients that make $100,000 a year that always have money, they always have extra money. And I have clients that make $1 million a year, this is no joke, who complain to me about not being able to pay their bills, right? So it's not always how much you make, it's what you do with what you have. And so we have to understand what you're trying to accomplish to put into context of how is what you have left over enough to accomplish what you want. Okay, thanks. Absolutely. All right. So let's get into debt and credit management. So let's start with credit. So everybody probably heard of the Equifax debacle that happened not too long ago, and that lots of people's credit got compromised, or information got compromised, which could lead to their credit being compromised. Let's just start at 30,000 feet of what credit is. So credit is your ability to pay back people that you've borrowed money to in its simplest form. And the people that you've borrowed money from are reporting to 3 different credit agencies, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. And they're basically keeping track of how well you've done paying these people back. And they're going to assign a score that's based on a report. And that report, or really that score, is going to be judged for any time that you go get a loan. And so you want to make sure that that report is as clean as it can be and as accurate as it can be, so that that score is as high as it can be. So what are some best practices here? The first one is to just do simple things like open your mail, right? If you have a bill that's late, and by mail I mean email as well, because unfortunately these days a lot of people are just slipping emails out and assuming that you see them. And if you're anything like me, I'm kind of like a, I kind of put my emails off to the side. But that email could say, you're 45 days late on this particular small student loan that you totally forgot about because it was an afterthought and you always forget about that loan, right? And that's an issue. So you want to make sure that you just do simple things like open your mail. The next thing is to really know your debt. Know who you owe what to, so that if a bill doesn't come in the mail, you're going to know it. You're going to go, oh gosh, how come that bill didn't come in? And you're going to know to pay it anyhow, because you don't get a second chance. If you don't pay a bill that you owe, there's no do-over card. There's no, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was in Europe. They don't care, and that's going to go against your credit score, which could impact your ability to buy a house, a practice, and it could be a domino effect with lots of other things. So know your debt. Know who you owe what to. And then really review all 3 scores and reports. What I do, and it usually happens to be in the spring, you can go to any one of the credit agencies and you can order all 3 scores and all 3 reports. It'll cost you like $50. You'll get it all at once. You can look at them and just make sure that everything is okay. And it's not uncommon where 2 of them could have your information right and 1 of them could have it wrong. In fact, I don't want to say it's the rule, but it's very, very common. So There's also ways that you can go to each agency and get your credit report for free one time a year, but that doesn't come with a score. The score is really the representation that you care about. So my best practice is pay the $50 and just make sure that everything is the way that it should be, especially at this stage of your life where there's house purchases and practice purchases and your credit is really going to be important to you. You don't want to mess around. And if you do find an issue, it could take months to figure out and to get it rectified. So just make sure that you're on top of that. So for the most part, that's kind of credit in a nutshell. Quickly, I'm just going to show this is how credit is established. So your payment history, how much you owe to who, credit history, new credit, how many times you're looking to secure new credit, and then the types of credit do you have. Is it not just all one type of thing? Is it multiple types? Those are all going to go into how that score is established. So one easy best practice here, if you're going to buy a car and you go to 3 different car dealerships, don't take out a loan application with all 3 car dealerships. Wait until you know where you're going to borrow money from and then make that, put your best foot forward in order to get that credit extended, because you don't want too many people checking your credit needlessly. That'll have a negative impact on your score. And then it really goes out from there in terms of lots of other ways that we can manage and make sure that credit is as good as it can be. Bum bum. Anyone have debt? What a jerk. Sorry, it's 8:10 at night. I'm doing what I can to stay energized myself and keep everyone else energized. How do people feel about their debt? My guess is
Worried.
Worried, anxious, miserable. Those are all very common, natural, reasonable responses when we start talking about debt. I don't mind your debt. In fact, I'm okay with your debt. Easy for me to say, right? I'm not paying the bill. But why do I say that? Why am I okay with your debt? Because if you look at the balance sheet of pretty much any company in the country, you're going to find that they have debt, and oftentimes a lot of debt. Why? Because they're going to get a lot further. They're going to use what's called leverage, and they're going to get themselves a lot further with that debt than they ever would have been able to had they not had the debt in the first place. So you're sitting where you are right now. You're going to be able to earn the incomes that you're earning, or at least want to earn maybe. You're going to do the things that you want to do because of that debt. So from that perspective, it really is a good thing because it's allowing you to do something and earn something that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. However, just like these businesses, oftentimes who have staff people or full departments of people to manage that debt, you need to run yourself like a business as well. Some of you might have practices and are running yourselves like a business, but even if you don't, even if you're an associate, you still need to run yourself like a business. You need to understand how that debt creates leverage for you and make positive, good decisions with that debt the best that you can to make sure that it does get you ahead as far as you can go. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So the first thing that I have to say is that everybody has a different situation and philosophy. Some of you that I'm talking to right now might have no debt. Others of you might have undergrad and dental debt, and it could be approaching $600,000 or $700,000, right? So everybody's got a different situation. Some people get panic attacks when they think about their debt. Other people don't even think about it. So we really have to, when I talk with somebody, we really get sitting down and understanding their philosophy and creating their unique strategy of how we're going to deal with that debt. That's a very important first step to talk about. But there are some things that we do need to talk about that are consistent, I believe, for everyone when we're talking about debt. So the first thing is to pay off debt without sacrificing savings. Why do I say that? Well, because if all we do is pay off debt, and we don't take a step back and put money over to the side, if anything happens and we need money, what are we going to do? We're going to go right back into debt. And I see that happen every day, the dog chasing the tail phenomenon. Number two, for many of you, if we're going to buy a practice, these banks are going to require that we have money sitting aside. Whether we use it as a down payment or not, they're going to require that we have money sitting to the side. So if we haven't saved and all we've done is pay off debt, that could now potentially get in the way of our ability to buy a practice. So we've got to find a balance between paying off debt and saving. And it could oftentimes be we're going to save and not really pay a ton of attention to the debt. Then once we've saved and figured things out, then we're going to start making a lot of accelerated payments to our debt, right? But we've got to have that idea that we need to do both at the same time and not just stay laser focused on our debt. Here's another example. Has anyone ever heard of the rule of 72? This is a fun fact. Basically what it says, if we take the rate of return that we can earn on some hypothetical investment, so let's just say you've got some hypothetical investment, it's a mutual fund, and it's earning 10%, right? Well, if you divide that by 72, it'll tell you how many years it would take that money to double at that rate of return. So in that scenario, it would take 7.2 years for that mutual fund to double. So let's go through a quick example here. So we're 30 years old, we've been able to save $20,000, and we are in that hypothetical investment that is returning us 10% on our money. So when we're when we are 37, we have $40,000. When we're 44, we have $80,000. When we're 51, we have $160. When we're 58, we have $320. When we're 65, we have $640. Well, let's say that same person was able to save earlier and they had $20,000 at 23. Well, that 640 is now 1.3 million. It's that last double that made the difference, right? So the context here is that if all you do is put your money towards debt repayment, you're potentially missing that last double, that 1 million to 2 million, that 2 million to 4 million. And that last double could be the difference between retiring you, educating your children, and a myriad of other goals that you might have. You know, back 30 years ago, if you could come out of dental school and have $50,000 of debt, that might have worked. But the reality is now you're going to have your debt with you for a long time, you know, unless you've got a rich family member who's going to come and pay it off for you. So we need to learn how to live with that and make sure that we can accomplish all of our goals and not just focus on the debt. And the problem is we can sometimes get so emotional over the debt that we ignore everything else. But if we do that, and let's say it took us 10 years to pay off the debt, but we hadn't started saving yet, well now, what's that last double? 320 to 640, right? Something like that. We're going to miss all of that potential backside. So again, the point there being, we've got to look at this in the context of a plan because we could be missing other opportunities by just paying off the debt. So the other part there is, and so this is the question that will generally come up is, but what if I can't earn the same interest rate? If I've got 6.5% debt and I can only earn 4%, I should be paying off that debt. The problem with that is that it doesn't just become financial, it becomes solving goals, right? We still need to educate your children, we still need to retire, we still need to do those things, so it's not a simple function of finance because it's a function of actually getting the money into an account that'll be there when I'm actually ready to use it. Just paying off debt doesn't retire you, right? You need to actually save that money to retire. Just paying off debt means you have no debt. So again, I know we're getting out there and we could talk about just this for 3 hours, but I want to at least kind of throw these concepts out so tomorrow when you're working on a patient, you can say, God, that guy doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense at all.
I was going to ask about that, though. So you feel that is like a pretty firm rule, regardless of what your interest percentage rate is on your loans and regardless of like whatever your investment account percentage is. It's a pretty firm rule that you need to be.
Well, here's why it can't be a firm rule. I have to be careful of firm rule is that everybody's situation is different. Right, mm-hmm. So you know, if we've got family money, if we've got other money saved, or again, everybody's circumstances are so different. It's hard, but yes, on all things being equal, yes, we need to do all things at once. We can't just be laser focused, and especially because you're already starting your careers later than most of your friends. right? You know, your friends that went out and started different careers already have a bunch of money in their retirement plans and so forth, and you're just getting started. Or maybe your employer has a 1-year wait on the plan and you haven't even started yet, right? So that's another reason, is that we really have to look at things in the context of a plan, because we need to make sure that we're hitting on all of those different objectives.
Okay, thanks.
So be organized. Create that debt consolidation spreadsheet that I mentioned earlier. Make sure you know you owe who, you know, what to who, so that if a bill doesn't show up, that you're going to be able to preemptively make that payment anyhow, to help keep you out of trouble. Review repayment options and alternatives, right? There's a lot of options out there on the federal side. We didn't even touch on the income-based repayments and the forgiveness options that are out there now. There's student loan consultants. There's people that I work with that we can have conversations with if those are some things that need to be addressed. So we do want to review those things, and sometimes we can be surprised that there are options that are available to us that we didn't think there would be. But then there's the whole idea of, even if I do qualify for some of those programs, will this debt even actually be forgiven? And that's a whole other conversation. Right now is the first month at which that program has been around for 10 years, and that we should be finding out if some debts will be forgiven. So we're going to know a lot more probably in the next 6 months of how these programs are going to be looked at. But the point is, in most cases, we don't want to let the program tail wag the debt repayment dog. And I'll say it again, that program, that loan forgiveness tail wagging the debt forgiveness dog. I've seen people on the medical side completely change around their careers and specialties, all in the name of this program that could be struck out by legislation and with a stroke of a signature. So we just have to be real careful to understand what is the program, but even if we do qualify for it, what are the ramifications of that, and if everything worked out perfectly, does it still make sense for me? And then the last thing is refinancing strategies. So this was something 3 years ago we didn't even have to really be able to talk about. Now we've got all these different companies that are willing to come and refinance your loans. Some things can work really, really well. Other things we have to be a little bit more careful of, and a lot of that is that sometimes to get the lower interest rates, we have to do shorter amortization periods. Well, what's the problem with that? We have a much higher payment. Well, that can now trickle down into potentially impacting our ability to buy a practice and so forth as well. So that's why we have to, again, be careful and work in the context of a plan, and not just say, hey, I can afford $5 grand a month right now for a loan payment, so I'm going to pay these things off in 7 years. Again, you might be able to do that, but if we're looking in the context of a plan, it also could impact other things that you might want to be accomplishing also. So we just have to be careful and make sure we know what we're doing before we get into some of these strategies. So this was a big one. Have any questions pop up here?
Nope, I think that everybody seems to be pretty clear on that.
All right.
Or overwhelmed.
I'll take. Yeah, I was going to say, right. I'll take it as a compliment. But hey, I've got a big ego. I take everything as a compliment. So. All right. So let's talk about risk management. So this is kind of the boring stuff, right? Your malpractice insurance, your life insurance, disability insurance, and so forth. Most of these things are going to be handled by your employer. I think most people know these days you got to have health insurance. You've got to protect that foundation. Why I do want to talk about this, though, is for a couple of different things, which is, one, there's the protection itself that you might need, right? So if you have a family, if you have a house, and your spouses, the two of you are kind of, you're both working, and so you're relying on each other. If something were to happen to one of you, protecting that person's income. That's one part of it. But the other part of it is that actually getting the insurance in the first place. We don't just get insurance because we want it. We have to qualify for it through these companies, and they don't have to give it to us. But once they do give it to us, they can't ever take it back. Why is this important? In the context of practice purchase, many companies require that you have insurance in order to take these loans out. I've been a party to a number of situations where people haven't been able to get insurance, or paid a heck of a lot more than they wanted to pay for it, and that was the only way they were able to purchase the practice. So I'm going to suggest to a lot of people that they're buying insurance well before they really need it on the surface, because I want to make sure that when they're ready to buy the practice, that that's not what's getting in the way of their ability to do so. And again, I've been involved with situations where it absolutely 100% has been what's held up the process of being able to buy the practice. And that's a really, really hard place to be. And unfortunately, dental school was hard. It's not uncommon for people to have mental nervous issues and so forth, and that all makes purchasing insurance that much harder. So that's in the context of risk management. It's not just about what you need to cover today. It's putting yourself in a situation to make sure that you're not hurting your ability to get what you want tomorrow. So I think that's enough about that. The part that I do want to talk about, though, is many of you might have got out of dental school, and maybe somebody was running around the hallways and got you to sign an application once to get disability insurance. This is incredibly important for procedural doctors, right? Anybody who's using their hands every day, what it takes to disable you versus some moron like me who's sitting behind a desk talking into a microphone is completely different. So it's really important that you have that coverage updated. Sometimes I joke around to people and say, what do you have to show for your educations? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I always say, you have this platinum head, right? You have this platinum head and these platinum hands. And if you're not able to use that head or those hands, then all that work, everything that you've done kind of goes off to the side. So having really good and well thought out disability coverage is the only thing that you have to protect that head and those hands. And so, again, get it reviewed. If you don't have it at all, you need to have it. If you do have it, but it was just something you bought in residency and don't really even know what you bought, you got to get it reviewed and make sure that you've got everything that you can get. And then when you buy a practice, there's going to be different coverages that pay the overhead of the practice if you can't practice. If you have a partner, coverage it's going to pay if one of the partners gets disabled to make sure the other partner isn't sitting there holding the ball with the practice and that those shares are bought out. So again, it's an important part of the overall review because unfortunately what it takes to disable a dentist is very different than what it takes to disable a lot of other people. So again, just get disability insurance and make sure that it's reviewed regularly. Questions on risk management? Probably not.
Looks like we're okay.
All right, here we go. So here's kind of a quick crash course on purchasing a practice. This is only scratching a very, very small surface on all the different items that we get into when we're contemplating purchasing a practice. But I want to at least hit on some of the big ones so that you can begin thinking about them. I'd love to have this part be interactive. So if you have questions, please ask them, whether it just be sending a message to Ava or raising your hand. So number one is building your team and building that team before you need them. I'm a huge fan of having people around you before you really need these people, right? You could say right now, I'm a W-2 employee, I've got no complexity to my tax situation, what do I need a CPA for? And you're completely right. The problem is that instantly next year or next month when you say it's time for me to buy a practice, I want you to have somebody that you already trust. I want you to have somebody that you can run the numbers of the practice by and that you believe what they're telling you when they say it's not a good deal or it's a great deal. And you're having that relationship with that person is what's going to be the difference of that happening or not. So I'm going to say get a CPA well before you think you actually need a CPA. An attorney. Do you need an attorney now? No. But is there any rule against going to talk to one to say, hey, I might buy a practice someday. When I do that, what's the deal? What are you going to need from me? How much time are you going to want? Have the conversation, know who the person is. A financial person like me, should you choose to, a banker, a backer, you have a family member who's going to help you finance a practice, or are you going to use a bank? If so, there's no rule you can't go talk to these banks sooner rather than later. When you're down at Yankee, sit down with Wells or Bank of America or whoever else and just say, hey, when I'm ready to go, what are you going to need from me? How much money do I have to have set aside? What's the deal? Knowledge is power, and you want to fill yourself with as much of these variables as soon as possible so that when you do start to make these decisions, you already have a lot of this information, and you can just make a quick phone call. Practice brokers, don't ignore them when you go to the show. Shake their hands, see what they're all about. And again, they're going to call you every once in a while and say, hey, we got this practice. What do you think? And a lot of times the good practices go really fast. Sometimes they don't even hit the market. So having a relationship with these people can really make the difference of getting exactly what you want. A contractor, right? There's people out there that build and renovate dental practices. You know, you might see a practice and want to bring that person in to get their perspective on it. Know who they are already. Have a conversation. And then other mentors. So this is probably my favorite untapped resource, is retired dentists, right? These are people who have, you know, been in this career for, you know, 30 years plus, who, you know, might have been at the top of their game, and then they just stopped and they're looking to give back. They'd love nothing more to have a conversation and say, hey, here's what I did right, here's what I did wrong. And so I think they're a great resource. And Abe and I have talked about this, but I'm working on an initiative to create a pool of retired dentists who want to give back and help out new dentists. So more to come as it relates to that. Purchasing a practice. So, define your perfect practice. You want to know when you find it, you want to know that you found it, right? So you want to spend some time going through the mental exercises of, you know, how many operatories do I want? Where do I want it to be? Am I okay renovating? You know, what is it? What kind of walk the walk in your head? And that's why, again, why you want to talk to so many different people to get a sense of what it is that you're looking for. What are the price and financing perimeters? We're going to talk next about the banking side of it, but how much of a practice are you going to be able to afford? You know, should you be swimming in this pond when you should really be over in this pond? So have some understanding of what gets you what. And then, you know, how large of a practice is it? But again, the end result is you want to know when you've found the perfect practice, you want to know it. And because, again, a lot of these things can happen very quickly, you want to have done a lot of the preparation in advance. Buying into a practice as an associate. And so, you know, there's a little bit of a caveat to this, and I have to be careful in saying it, because there are absolutely ways that this percentage can be increased. That being said, on a national level, only about 10% of associates actually will end up buying into a practice, right? Now, again, I have to be incredibly careful when I say this, because it's talked about almost, I don't want to say 80% of the time, but a very high percentage. But again, the ones that actually make that happen is a much smaller number. What are the things that we can do to drastically increase that percentage? Hyper communication and a mutual understanding of expectations. So what generally happens? A dentist goes to work with a dentist, and they say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I think the idea of buying in the future would be great. Let's do it. I think that would be awesome. And so the dentist signs the papers and starts working there, and, you know, they're thinking in their head, yeah, I'm buying into the practice in 2 years. Life is good, right? And then it starts to not happen, and the conversation starts to not be had. And then all of a sudden, 3.5 years into it, the owner dentist will come with a contract and say, okay, here we go, I'm ready, here you go, here it is, sign here. And the newer dentist is saying, well, what are you talking about? You know, that doesn't make sense, and that's not what I would want to do, and that's not how I would do this. And then all of a sudden you start to get into this situation where there can be a lot of backpedaling, and the older dentist feels like, hey, I just spent 10 grand on this contract and you don't like it? What are you talking about? And the younger dentist is saying, yeah, but I'm not even getting a percentage of hygiene for 3 years. Why would I sign that? Right? So the point is, you want to have a ton of communication, right? If that's what's set up front, then when you have an employee meeting or review and so forth, you want to say, hey, so what are we thinking on the buy-in side? Are you still thinking that? Am I still thinking that? Let's just have a conversation. Expectations: will there be a buy-in? What will it look like? Have we established a practice price of the purchase before I got here? Because, now we're here and I've just worked in this practice and I just took your practice that's 600 grand to $1 million, and you've only worked 2 days a week and I've worked 5 days a week on Saturdays and Sundays. Do I get a participation in that value? Right? So those expectations and that communication needs to be had. And if you're having those conversations, then it's so much more likely that when you actually get to that point, you're both going to be on the same page and be able to come to an agreement and make things work. So again, I have to be careful. 10% nationally. It can be light years higher than that. It's a huge part of my job is making that happen. But again, hyper communication and mutual understanding of expectations. Financing variables, real quick. Meet with banks. Know what it is that you're going to have to put away or have put away in order for the financing to work. So most banks Even these the Bank of Americas and the Wells that will do the 110% financing and so forth, they're still going to require that you have funds set aside in anticipation, even though you don't have to necessarily give them as a down payment, that you have to show that you have them. So you want to know, if I'm thinking of buying an $800,000 practice, how much money am I going to have set aside? What's that going to look like? Would I qualify based on the decisions that I've already made, et cetera, et cetera. What loan length options are available, so that's going to directly impact to how much your payment is. And the last one, I get this question oftentimes, should I buy my house before or after the new practice? There's not an easy answer to this necessarily. Again, it is definitely an it depends situation, but some common themes are when a bank is looking to determine if they're going to finance you or not, yes, they're looking to see how much debt you have, but really more than that, they're looking at, can I afford the debt? Can I make the monthly payments? So let's just say you had rent that was $2,500 a month, and then you had a mortgage that was $2,500 a month. From the bank's perspective, it might not make a difference. It could, but it very well might not. The other thing is that if you don't buy a house and you get into the practice, most banks are going to want some number of years of making, of having a regular income before they're going to extend that mortgage to you. So you might be saying after you get into the practice that 2 years plus until you're really able to buy a house, because you're not going to have that income to be able to show the bank. So a lot of times it does make sense to buy the house first and then buy the practice second. Again, it depends. Don't take that as verbatim, but it's a question that comes up a lot, so I wanted to answer that. So that's the last slide I have on the purchasing a practice. Any questions pop up? Hopefully everybody's not asleep.
It looks like everyone's good there. I do have just a quick question. Say when you first start working at a practice and buying into the practice isn't really on your radar initially, but you work there for a little bit and you are establishing value within that practice. How do you go about determining the value that you've added to the practice as an associate? Say you work there for a few years and then you decide maybe I do want to buy in. Yeah. So part of the gray area and part of the reason for hyper communication and mutual understanding of expectations, because once that's happened, it's a huge gray area, right? They say, well, yeah, but I'm sure I've only been working 2 days a week, but I'm twice as productive as you, and yeah, but then you took a week off too, it can be really hard, and so you can have some dentists that are really forward thinking and buy into the concept and might have even got a valuation before you came aboard. There's others where this is going to be completely foreign to, and they're going to be like, well, what do you mean? It's my practice. I took the risk. You were just working at it. So it can be all over the spectrum. So, and again, that's the hard part, because sometimes what you're thinking and what they're thinking can be right.
Yeah. So there's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. There's best practices. There's things that I would suggest if I was tapped on the shoulder before that happened, but usually that's not the case.
Okay, sounds good.
So real quick, let's just kind of run through the themes of our session this evening. Step back and make the decisions in the context of a plan. The things that you do today can have a huge impact on things that you do tomorrow. It's kind of like trajectory planning, right? A little change here can make a huge change down the road, especially as it relates to practice purchase. Importance of budgeting and trial budgeting at all stages. The saving structure and paying yourself first. Things to consider before making an investment. What's my tolerance for risk? Time horizon? How is it taxed? Should you be working with an advisor? Avoiding the doctor traps, again, by taking that step back and doing it in the context of a plan. Protect your credit. Order it from time to time. Be an active participant in creating your debt strategy. Don't let it run you just because they're telling you that's what your payment is. Risk management for both today but also for tomorrow in preparation of the practice purchase. And then practice purchase preparation. What should you be doing today to prepare yourself, even just in your thought process while you're working on patients, of what you're going to need to do when that time finally arises. So again, scratching the surface, we could take any one of these and talk about it for 2 hours, but I think that's a good place to start in terms of trying to work on kind of financial literacy and what we want to be looking at. So real quick, this is my somewhat cheesy slide of who I am. So all these different things that I do that overlap in order to create the puzzle so that we can have happy life. Whew, look at that. What is it? Is it 8:40 at night? So forgive me to have a little comic relief here, but it's funny. I think I told you even my marketing department was like, Troy, you don't want anything to do with that slide. And I was like, yeah, that's the money slide. That's I need it.
I think it's a good amount of cheesiness.
Good amount of, okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Hopefully everybody else can endure my cheesiness. Hopefully it's no worse than my joke that I started with. So again, the last thing, I just wanted to throw this out there. If anybody has interest, I meet with all Dental Society members. There's no cost or obligation. Basically, we have a conversation. I kind of tell you how I think I can help or not, and then completely up to you of where we decide to go. But just want to throw that out there that I'm here as a resource. And then lastly, was this helpful? Would like this to be sort of the first of a series of webinars, so would really like to know what else you guys would like to hear about. So after I end this session today, you're going to get a quick evaluation. If you could just fill that out and let us know what else would be helpful and how we did and what else we could talk about, and that would be awesome.
Also, for the participants as well, could you just send me an email letting me know that you were participating in the webinar, and then in order to receive your CE credits, we'll have a form that I'll send back to you from the Dental Society. So you'll get like a survey from Troy, and then send me an email as well so that we can get a survey from the Dental Society so that you can get your CE credit for participating in the call tonight. So does anybody have any lingering questions before we wrap it up? No, looks like everybody's good. I think I'm reading this correctly. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys all so much for spending an hour of your evening with us tonight. I hope that you guys all took a little bit of information away from this as valuable. And like Troy said, this is hopefully the beginning of a webinar series for us. So I'd like to know what you guys would like to hear moving forward, if even just more in depth of what we talked about tonight, because like Troy said, it really is scratching the surface, and these conversations can go so much more in depth. So yeah, so hopefully this is one of many, and let us know what you took away and what you thought about tonight and what you'd like moving forward. So I think that's all.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for spending the night with us, and please let me know what I can do, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.